Have you ever heard the argument that the Union was using German mercenaries during the Civil War?
I have, but I always thought that was like a propaganda that was like made up by the South. Like, how true is that?
Well, it was used as propaganda, but you can definitely understand the the perspective of the Confederates. I mean, imagine being a Confederate soldier and you're facing off against these regiments where no one speaks English and they're
Yeah.
wearing these like with these weird uniforms and
Mhm.
you find out they were offered these huge cash bounties just to fight. They thought that they were being invaded by hired foreigners, not Americans,
Mhm.
because you had nearly 200,000 German born soldiers fighting for the Union. And that
Right.
was more than any other immigrant group.
Mhm.
And entire units were made up of Germans with German officers. They were speaking German. They were flying German flags. And in places like New York and even Western Virginia, they were forming all German regiments.
Yeah. I mean, so we're not talking about like Americans with German descent. We're just talking about like German immigrants to America, right?
Yeah, I mean we're talking about both, but the Germans that I'm referring to, these weren't second or third generation. Um, they were essentially
Fresh off the
straight off
boat.
the boat. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and some had just arrived a year or two earlier. In states like Massachusetts, even imported men from Germany to fill their regiments.
Mm.
So when Southerners called the mercenaries, they weren't entirely pulling it out of thin air. These were literal foreigners getting paid to fight.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. But like, to be clear, we're not talking about like mercenary armies, right? Like, not like the German Hessians, as an example, who have like a bad name and a bad rap for American history, right?
No, I mean, this wasn't like the British hiring Hessians in the Revolutionary War.
Hmm.
These guys were not professional soldiers for hire, showing up in like a full Prussian kit. They
That'd be
were
cool, though.
they were migrants or refugees. Most of them were completely broke.
Hmm.
Um, they didn't have a pot to piss in, and they fled Europe. And when they got to the United States, they were crammed into tenements, and they barely had enough to survive. So the Union started waving around these big enlistment bounties. This money was like life changing for them because
Hmm.
under the July 1964 draft call, some districts were offering over $1,000 per man. That's like 20, 20 grand today.
That's crazy.
So,
1864, by the way. You said 1964.
18,
But even still, $1,000 back then, Jesus. You're
yeah,
right. That's a lot of money.
that's a lot of money. So like even small towns during the Civil War were in these bidding wars. So like Rhode Island, they offered like $350 uh, for one of these bounties, and that doesn't include state and federal pay. So
Right. So
you
you have
have these like
350 bucks
major,
plus all the extra bonuses, right?
yeah, all the other benefits from the military,
Hmm. Yeah.
because so like the major cities started pouring money in this. So Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, they were all pouring money into this program because you have to remember that the draft was extremely unpopular in northern
Hmm.
states. After the Enrollment Act in 1863, there were massive riots. We just spoke about this, I think, in our
Yeah.
last episode.
Yeah, we did. Mhm.
Or was it last episode or a couple episodes ago?
Yeah. Not too long ago.
Over 100 people died in those riots.
Hmm.
So what the federal government did was that they assigned quotas to each congressional district based on the on their population and I think like enlistment numbers or previous enlistment numbers. So if a district met its quota through volunteers, it didn't have to hold a draft.
Yeah. So basically, like, threw money at the problem to avoid it. That's what they did. Just throw money at it.
Yeah, so city governments, counties, and even like private citizens created these bounty funds to entice men to volunteer before a draft was necessary.
Hmm.
In richer towns, they recruited from other areas. And in some cases, like in Boston, they imported immigrants from abroad. That number is really not that high. It's like 700 people that, or 700, 900, I think. Maybe someone can correct me in the comment section. I'm sure they would love to. But
Yeah.
I don't think the actual people that they recruited from Germany itself, that was so big, but they still did do that. Um, so you know, essentially that meant that they were they were poaching either the poor or foreign-born men from elsewhere to avoid having their own citizens drafted.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like the way some people are spinning this, or like people in the South were spinning this, is that the Union was using like Colombian mercs or like the Golden Army, like to go fight the South. So it wasn't exactly like that.
Yeah, I mean that's where the line gets blurry. So like no, like they were not contract soldiers hired from foreign governments, or they weren't just
Right.
like private armies like not Blackwater.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't signing the Union wasn't signing deals with like these military contractors.
Yeah.
Um, they weren't signing deals with Prussia or Austria to send troops. So no, they were not mercenaries in a legal sense, but in the eyes of the South, and I mean even some Northerners, it felt that way. And you're right to point out that the Confederates leaned hard into this narrative because why
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't they?
Yeah.
They use it in the propaganda to paint the Union as uh, morally bankrupt, too weak to defend itself without hiring foreigners. So
Mm-hmm.
they'd say things like, the North doesn't have the courage to fight its own wars, or, they're paying Germans, and because they did this with Irishmen too,
Mm-hmm.
to do their killing, and it also played into their whole worldview that the South was fighting for their honor, tradition, and American soil, while the Union was just throwing money at immigrants who didn't speak English and didn't really care about the country. I mean, many of Sherman's soldiers came from Midwestern states where German immigration had exploded in the 1850s.
Yeah.
So as a result, they participated in the total war strategy against the South. So just
Mm-hmm.
like imagine having your farm burned down by some German guy who barely spoke English.
Yeah. I mean, I guess a lot of people in Europe in the 1940s could have imagined
Yeah,
something like that, but
I guess a lot of people in the 1940s could imagine that.
yeah. Um, All right, I think we're getting a little bit off topic here. I need to look more into this because I want to know if if you're full of shit or not. But let's move to World War One. So after the Civil War, Germans are seen as loyal to America, right? But a lot of this changes in the early 20th century during the years of World War One. After the U.S. entered the war, German Americans were under suspicion, and there was the expectation to basically publicly prove their patriotism. This, kind of led to these so-called loyalty tests, and I just want to talk a little bit about them because I find them really interesting. Tell me about these loyalty tests.
Yeah, I mean, so a loyalty test, it wasn't like a written exam or anything like that. It was more so like a social expectation. After the U.S. entered the war in 1917, German Americans were they were viewed with suspicion. People thought that they might be secretly loyal to the Kaiser instead of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So these tests, they come in a bunch of forms, and you might be expected to buy Liberty bonds. If you didn't, people would say you were pro-German, or there would be an expectation that you would publicly denounce Germany, even if your parents were from there. You wouldn't be speaking German in public or at church. Some towns even banned it in schools.
Yeah.
And then a lot of German families, they changed their names to sound more Anglo. So like a Schmidt would turn into a Smith.
Or Schicklgruber will turn into a Hitler. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
But I mean, a lot of families also sent their kids to go fight in the war too. Because
So they'd be
basically,
like,
if you
"Oh, we're
were,
totally patriotic. Look, I sent my kid to war." Yeah, it's
yeah,
fucked up.
well, basically, if you were German American, you had to overperform in your Americanness to avoid harassment.
Honestly, I'm not going to try and go down this rabbit hole here, but I feel like that kind of happens right now with certain ethnic groups. Feeling like they have something to prove to the wider majority here in the United States. But I digress. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Maybe another time. There's some really messed up things that went down though. Like this wasn't just social pressure. It got pretty ugly. I think. For example, in Collinsville, Illinois, there's this German American guy named Robert Prager, and he gets lynched by a mob in 1918. And his only crime was that he was a socialist. He had a German accent, and he applied to join a local miners' union. Like, that was it. That was enough. They wrapped him in an American flag and marched him through the streets, and they strangled him to death. And the killers were tried. They put him on trial, and then they were acquitted. And the jury said it was done in the name of patriotism. Let that sink in for you. They literally said, it's fine to kill this guy because it was done in the name of patriotism. Failure of the justice system, in my opinion. But, then you had all these towns that were renaming everything, right? Sauerkraut became Liberty Cabbage. Side note, do you remember during the 9/11 saga, like early time after, there was like this movement of people trying to rename French fries to freedom fries because the French weren't hard enough on the word terror. Do you remember that shit?
Yeah, I do. Freedom fries.
Freedom fries. A couple of other stupid ones. So we have sauerkraut becoming Liberty Cabbage. We have dachshunds, the dog breed, they were calling them Liberty Pups, and German language newspapers were just basically shut down, or they were burned down in some cases. In Iowa, the use of like foreign languages in public, including in church and later on over the phone, were looked down upon. Like imagine not being able to pray in the language that is like your primary language, like your mother tongue. It's pretty wild, right? It's crossing into some First Amendment, violations there for sure. Schools start dropping German classes. German music was banned. Beethoven got canceled. I'm not even kidding. Like they canceled Beethoven. And then you get like groups like the American Protective League, who was a private citizens group who basically were deputized to spy on their neighbors, open up their mail and like root out like what they considered as disloyalty wherever they found it or can perceive it. It's basically a full-on cultural purge, and even the people who had been in America for generations, who had fought in the Civil War, who had been considering themselves 100% American, suddenly had to prove that they weren't like the enemy. And that's how fast the tide turns, and there used to be these German towns in America, and they were erased, gone.
Yeah, you don't really see them anymore. I will add that also German immigration stopped to a large degree after like 1890 something, because that's when Germany started like providing a lot of its social welfare programs. Yeah. So people were like, we're probably going to stay here. We get like a pension here and all of that. So
we can still speak German here too.
Yeah. So immigration largely stopped right in the late 19th century. However, I mean, there are still German-born people. I mean, we're talking about people who may have come to America when they were 6. They're ready to fight in the war when they're 20 or 21 when the war starts. But just going back to that, this crazy effort to erase German culture, because this is where it really where you see the death of it. Mm-hmm. This country was in like a straight up state of mania. I mean, like going through people's mail. But you had these deputized people to go through people's mail and be like, "Oh, we'll see if he's writing a letter to Mexico or something to instigate a fight." That's some wild stuff. And what's really wild about it is that the United States, or even Anglo-American, didn't have some ancient blood feud with Germany. Most of them thought that they were the same peoples. Most of the Protestant elite at this time, they considered themselves Germanic people. I mean, who was Britain invaded by? Who were they dominated by? The Anglo-Saxons, who were a Germanic tribe, or they were Germanic peoples. I'm no expert on that, the British invasion cycles in the Middle Ages, but I mean that they saw themselves as having this shared ancestry. So it's really strange that this feud that the United States, turned so harshly, because there weren't centuries of war or inherent ethnic hatred. I bet most Americans at that point of time would not even really be able to point out Germany in a map
Probably
before
not.
1914.
Yeah,
Just like how most Americans now probably can't point out Iran at a map.
probably not.
But once the U.S. entered the war, the government and the media were able to essentially manufacture an enemy. And the Wilson administration, they create the Committee of Public Information, which was a propaganda office. If you couldn't tell by the name,
Right.
the Committee of Public Information. I mean, that's the most propaganda
Yeah.
sounding office I've ever heard of.
Yeah, right. Let me see if I can pull up some pictures, but go ahead, keep talking.
So the propaganda that they put out, I'm sure everyone has seen it. Everyone has seen the World War I propaganda from both the United States and from London. Let's actually go through some of it because I think it'd be interesting for people to see.
All right, yeah, let me bring this up here. So I think the most famous one is this one, like the King Kong looking one. It's like, destroy this mad brute, enlist in the U.S. Army, right? And it's a German monkey looking dude, for those who aren't watching this. And he's wearing a German army helmet. He's got the stupid German, mustache thing going on. He's got a big club, and on the club is the German word Kultur, which is bloodied, as is his fists. And the important part of this is he seems to have abducted a bliss white woman, who I'm presuming is supposed to be representative of, an American, delightful woman or something like that.
Got himself a white woman.
He got himself a white one. Very interesting. Funny picture. What else do we got? Let's see. This one says, your money brings the book when we need when we want it. What is this? From the American Library Association? This one's stupid. Let's look for another one.
I have an anti-German propaganda World War I.
This one looks pretty interesting. Let's see what this is all about. All right, this is a one-pager. British Empire Union, once a German, always a German. And it's like a whole-ass comic book. It's like, on this frame on the top left, is he bayoneting a baby?
He's bayoneting a baby.
Holy shit. All right, what else do they got? Okay, German's got a guy tied up on a stake here or something. He's got a stupid-looking grin on his face.
This one guy, there's a woman cowering in fear in the corner.
Yeah, he's probably
the implication is that she is
she does not consent.
She does not consent to what's going to happen next.
No.
And then you have this
what's this weird looking? Okay, so this is like supposed to be a mirror image, right? So on the left-hand side, we got this like evil German guy. I don't know what the hell this is.
A grenade,
maybe. Grenade, and then a bloody knife, and it looks like he killed somebody in the background, and he's walking. And in the same pose, now he's like this nice-looking German, business guy, and he's carrying a briefcase full of samples with a sticker of Berlin on it, and I guess it's trying to evoke and say, like, these two people are the same person, And then they're like, remember, every German employed means a British worker idle. Every German article sold means a British article unsold. British Empire Union. Okay, so this is obviously British propaganda against the Germans, but
it's
still
the same thing because
same
the British propaganda was going to the United States.
Right, exactly. Here's another one for victory bonds. 4 reasons for buying victory bonds. That's pretty funny.
And then zoom in the face of the German soldier. It's like a zombified. It's like straight out of night.
Let's see. Which one? This one?
The German soldier. Like what? Oh, it's a mustache.
Let's see.
I thought it was.
I didn't know what was going on with his mouth either. Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, I thought it was like some melted. I thought his face was melting. Honestly,
just really shitty picture. That's all. What else do they got? Let's see. Here's another one. This one crazy. This one appears to be French. Where was that one?
Oh, that's a good one right there.
This one's bad, actually pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie. It's
that one looks like a metal cover.
It's pretty metal. Okay, so it's like a gorilla wearing a German army hat, and his both of his arms are totally bloody, and it's clasping onto and dripping blood onto the earth, primarily dripping blood onto the European continent, and big question mark. This is in Australia, World War I poster. What else do we got here? This is a good article, historyhit.com. Good shit. What do you got? Oh yeah, this is the one I was looking for. The French one. It's just like a German army guy, but he looks like a Yeti, basically. The way that they portray the Germans in these is just like the dehumanizing, right? Like that's 100% what they're trying to do here. And honestly, what they get away with.
From my perception, I know this might sound cynical, is that we all accept that World War I was a banking war at its core.
Mm-hmm.
No one seriously disputes that massive financial interests had their hands all over it.
Yeah.
J.P. Morgan was funding the British and the French long before the U.S. ever declared war.
Right.
And American banks were deep in debt. They were deep in Entente debt, and a German victory would have meant massive defaults. So from that angle, Wall Street had every reason to push the U.S. into the fight. Essentially, J.P. Morgan got on the phone with Wilson and said, "You better fucking get into this war."
Yeah.
But the thing about Wilson is that I don't know. I used to, I was a kind of a more hardcore libertarian at one time, and you're kind of taught in libertarian indoctrination that Wilson is the most evil president in U.S. history. I mean, I don't think that Wilson was a good president by any means, and I think he made a lot of bad mistakes. I don't see him the same way I used to, though. I kind of look at him as so he was a university professor. He was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't a banker. He wasn't a general. He wasn't like some diplomat. He was an academic who spent most of his life at Princeton, who, he was absorbed in abstractions like democracy and moral progress.
Right.
He had no background in matters of war and peace. So when the war came, what I think is that he probably was told that this was going to be a short war and that it was going to be redemptive, and it was going to be a noble American mission to save civilization.
Mm-hmm.
But he was completely out of his depth. Yeah. He was surrounded by people who were very good at using his idealism to their own ends.
Right.
If you just look at his administration, like Colonel Edward House, who never held office and wasn't actually a colonel, he basically functioned as Wilson's primary foreign policy liaison. He was extremely pro-British, and he likely saw the war as this kind of racial civilizational showdown between the Anglo world and the German militarism. And I wonder if a lot of elites saw World War I this way. Just based off the common sentiment, I don't think that was like a super common view around the public, but around elite circles, especially the ones who are close to the British, I think a lot of them thought that way.
Mm-hmm.
That it was kind of like a war between like the good dramatic people and the bad dramatic people, who the bad dramatic people having lost their way, and now it was up to the good dramatic people to essentially correct to correct those mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, look, I kind of hinted at this before, but unfortunately, whenever you have kind of an ethnic group that, exists within a larger majority, that's got its own quasi or parallel society, with their own language or their own newspapers, their own schools, churches, things like that, that's always going to breed a certain amount of mistrust, I think, for the larger group. And even if that group's been loyal, to the country for generations, people start asking, who are they loyal to? Are they fully American? And, in the distinction that we're talking about right now, that dynamic was already at play with the German Americans, before the war even started. And at one point they were admired, but they were also seen as a bit separate from or apart from society. And the war just looked a little bit, it just turned a little bit of suspicion into like a whole lot of paranoia. And then, came the things like the Zimmermann telegram, which is Germany was offering Mexico like an alliance against the United States. And that changed everything, right? Because you have to remember the U.S. and Mexico had basically been at war, not long before that part, right? And the border situation was a mess. Honestly, still kind of a mess right now. But when the public hears that Germany, wants to arm Mexico and help them take back the American Southwest, suddenly this isn't just like a European conflict. This is a direct threat to American soil, or at least that's how they framed it. And then you imagine you're a Midwesterner in 1917. You've got German-speaking neighbors down the street. They read German newspapers. They sing German songs. Maybe they didn't buy a Liberty Bond. I don't know. And then you hear that Germany's trying to incite Mexico against the U.S. And then you're like, what the fuck? Fuck these Germans? That's the feeling that it incites. And that's how you get the idea of a fifth column in it. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it's true, because the function of the establishment of this fifth column idea is enough to severely impact the group who's unfortunate enough to be labeled as the fifth column. And I'll let you infer how what I might mean for the contemporary argument in the United States, but
So
reads it the same way.
Theodore Roosevelt called it hyphenated Americanism.
Yeah.
So Americans who identified with both their ancestral heritage and their American nationality. So essentially dual loyalties. And you can understand it in the case of Germany or Germans, because German communities could be clannish. They could be, they could be very absorbed into their own communities.
For sure.
So,
which, that kind of takes me to the point. Like, a lot of these German Americans did to prove their loyalty, and a lot of them changed their names to sound more Anglo. Like you mentioned one, Schmidt becoming Smith, Müller becoming Miller, Schneider becoming Snyder, and so on and so forth. And ethnic Germans were end up being the largest American ethnic group to serve in the war. Which is fascinating just by itself, right? This is a whole group of people that we're demonizing with propaganda, but they end up being the largest contingent that serves in the war. So ironically, they end up fighting for America in World War I, and they were also the most vilified. A little bit of a chicken and the egg. They end up serving the most because they were the most vilified.